I'm on a farm just outside Pretoria. Just down the road is the G20. It's starting, and it's chaos. Roadblocks everywhere, police everywhere. The whole thing is just a big theatrical performance.
Well, it's the same every time they run one of these events. It was the same in the G7 a couple of years ago in Cornwall, and the same when we attended Bilderberg, and all these types of events are the same charade.
Oh, hold on. You attended Bilderberg. I thought that's very secretive.
No, I didn't personally attend Bilderberg. We attended the protest pen that was set up outside Bilderberg. This was in 2013. And they had all the protesters, in inverted commas, kettled into one little field, which they had an entire canal between us and the venue, in an effort to keep everybody away. So just to clarify, I was not personally intended. Not entirely. Not entirely.
The funny thing, though, is that. The worst kept secret is the Bilderberg. I mean, they went on for decades denying their existence. And then I think it was in the 90s when they said, oh, all right, okay, it's a real thing. And it changes every year. They have different people who attend.
Yeah, well, they do, but there's absolutely a core that is there every year. And so the year that we went, one MP, that was Michael Meacher, attended the protest pen and was very outspoken, and then raised questions in the House of Commons afterwards. And actually, he did a very good job as far as it went, because he managed to get Ken Clarke, who was former Chancellor of the Exchequer, who was on the Bilderberg Steering Committee at the time, to come into the House of Commons and make a statement on it. And Ken Clarke attempted to, sort of make fun of the whole thing and pretend that it was nothing other than sort of a boys' smoking club. But he didn't succeed, actually. Meacher's point was made.
How influential do you think Bilderberg still is? I mean, do you think the Fabians have got more influence these days?
No, I think that all these types of secret organizations have influence, but that's because you see the same faces and names at them all. So, these types of meetings that are held under Chatham House rules, so people go in and they speak freely, but they're never attributed, even if there's a reporter there or a journalist there, and somebody's writing something about the meetings, nothing is ever attributed to anyone. So this is supposedly to give people the confidence that they can speak freely at these events. But of course, what it actually does is keep this air of secrecy around the whole thing. It's good that we know that these things are going on. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how valuable it is to go and protest at them, other than just to keep drawing attention to the fact that they are happening. And I think that there's certainly value in that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think to draw attention is really critical, because you look at we talked about it a little bit last week, but the G20, let's say all the fanfare, the razzmatazz, the chaos around it. But the point of it is that it's very, very public, and it gives not just the participants, but also the rest of the world something to hang their hat on, when in actual fact, it is very important to chart and record events like Bilderberg, because it's as though the G20 is in effect an inversion of that. It is very public, and it looks like this is where such and such a decision or policy comes from, when in actual fact, if it weren't for the coverage of and reporting around events like Bilderberg, we wouldn't be able to see how these connections do actually manifest. And in doing so, therefore, it undermines the narrative, and I think critically undermines the narrative surrounding events like the G20, because it makes you realise where stuff does happen and does matter in comparison with what we're told matters and where things happen.
But your question earlier about whether the Fabians are more influential or not. I mean, I think this is another organization that people have almost no understanding of. They don't understand what it was set up to do. They don't understand who the founders were. They don't understand the fact that a significant proportion of the current Starmer regime are members of the Fabian Society. And so they don't therefore understand necessarily where government policy comes from or what ideologies might be influencing current government policy. And you look back at the founders of the Fabian Society, and you've got people like Huxley and H.G. Wells, and these are people that were H.G. Wells, is known as a science fiction writer, and that's really all he's broadly known for. The fact that he was an absolute one world government proponent and actually wrote about this in some of his fiction. But he wrote many non-fiction books as well, absolutely designed to sort of drive political policy at the start of the 20th century. And one of the real significant policies that they had was at that time was the notion that Russia had to be dealt with, and here we are, 120 years later, whatever it is, and still we're trying to deal with Russia. And if we want to know where that sort of policy comes from, we got to look at organizations like the Fabian Society and try to work out, why Britain in particular is so determined to deal, in inverted commas, with this Russian bear.
What makes these groups very interesting for me is that they're just think tanks. They're just NGOs or whatever. They don't actually, enforce anything. Their ideas just get adopted.
Yeah, I think it's a mistake to say they're just because this comes back to the question of where government policy comes from, and so there are some there are a lot of think tanks out there that are just think tanks, but there are some very special organizations that aren't just anything, and they're extremely influential, they're extremely significant, and we should be watching what they're doing very, very closely.
Which ones do you think we should watch more closely? I mean, the World Economic Forum, for example, I don't even think you can protest. They surround that place with so much military, and they are very in your face, for example.
Yeah, but I think even though they're precisely they are in your face, and because of that, they're in fact less important than others. It's the ones that we're less aware of, and of course, UK column viewers or people that are watching similar kinds of content will be more familiar with some of the big names like Chatham House, for example, or Council of Foreign Relations, or Fabian Society. These types of organizations. Because we're talking about these on a reasonably regular basis, but the average man in the street isn't going to have heard of them. The part of the job that we have is to try to work out what the hierarchy is and work out which ones are the most influential.
But also, to a point, I don't think of course, it does matter which are more influential than others, but I think it's more a case of the principles and the fact that by association with people who do make decisions as part of a legislature or an executive or indeed a judiciary, they are in effect having improper relations with people who are outside of that particular system. And there is a sort of an inherent subversion of due process and democracy by not by the existence of think tanks, but certainly by the way that what is produced by think tanks and the way that it's arrived at and then disseminated, the way that's conducted and the relationships between the people who are apparently supposedly part of a political system that's supposed to involve the people is maybe not always, but I mean in so many respects. I mean the examples that we could bring out would be far too numerous to mention, but the way in which they do end up expressing themselves make it very, very obvious that this is simply policy and legislation sort of by other means. And that is not how things should be conducted at all. And therefore, again, the idea that that there should be secrecy rather than transparency just goes to show how off course the whole situation is. But like every other element of corruption in society, we are what's the word? We're effectively conditioned is the word, by the small things, the little corruptions that, and okay, our ideas as we talk from the UK to South Africa will each have a slightly different idea of what that means. We both know in principle what it means, which is that you're accepting a version of something, whether it be an event or a communication or whatever it is, that is not according to the proper process. And I think, mundane as it might sound, things like in the United Kingdom, things like queue barging are a really good example of that. The day that people accept queue barging is the day that they care less about corruption at any level. And it is extraordinary where that can take you. The lead item on the BBC News this morning was, oh my goodness, do we really have to keep talking about this in this way? The COVID inquiry. But of course, it is so incredibly overt, the way in which that's being used, not just as an exercise to whitewash what did happen at the time, but also to retain in the consciousness of people the elements which are absolutely well outside of anything that should have happened or should ever be able to happen again. This idea that, not considering whether or not something should have happened in the first place, but whether the timing of it was right. This whole thing was a total corruption, but we have come to accept it, and I think that's the danger, and that's why when we talk about whether it be think tanks or I absolutely bet I would bet that the way in which, let's say, the security for the G20 has been conducted, I bet that rules have been bent, if not actively broken, in order to do that. And as an example of that, but by way of sort of how corrupt these things can be, okay, different because it's not governmental, although of course it is, but the Davos meeting, the World Economic Forum gathering in Davos, the airspace is cleared for that event, and that is run by the Swiss authorities. And they share data with the World Economic Forum. So on an issue of sort of quasi-national security, there is a technology and information surveillance capability, as well as, in effect, a defense capability in terms of sort of presenting the idea that there's a threat from the air. And all of this is done without anybody batting an eyelid. It is completely remarkable. But when you read it and you read about the Swiss Aviation Authority and their relationship with the World Economic Forum, that is absolutely improper and should never, ever have been allowed to happen. And yet it does. And what's more, we all accept it.
Yeah, it's that acceptance that's a problem. But I mean, as Mike said earlier, what real difference does protesting make? How do you actually then get that acceptance?
Well, they because most people don't know that the thing's happening, and it's it's I don't know if you saw Mohammed bin Salman's visit to Washington, but one of the journalists dared to ask what about his role in the killing of the journalist Khashoggi, and Trump railed on the journalist, first of all calling her fake news, which, well, there may be something in that, but that's not the point in this particular case. He then went on to say, "Why are you here embarrassing our guest?" Right, but the role of journalism is supposed to be to hold authority to account, which is what this journalist in this case was doing. But the problem is that a lot of for many of the deeper state activities, shall we say, journalists are either editorially prevented from shining light on them, or they are perhaps linked to the deep state themselves, and therefore they will not ever go near those particular topics. And so it's only the likes of us that are talking about this stuff to any degree. And so it's not something which is in the public consciousness to a level which is required to sort of put any kind of opposition to it. So the basic answer to your question is it's because not many people are aware of the connections between, in this case, the Swiss aviation authorities and Davos. And, Davos is something that gets absolutely whitewashed, or it certainly gets a lot of very pro coverage in the mainstream media. It never gets any kind of challenge in the mainstream media. And so most people just think it's a place where, business people go to talk and make good decisions for the benefit of the world, which of course we know is not the case.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Mike, but something I've been thinking about, I don't know if I asked you or if it was somebody else, but I sometimes wonder whether Yuval Harari or Klaus Schwab are speaking from a point of want, or are they speaking from a point of futurism? So, like, for example, if I say to you, in the next 15 years, we're going to be living in a sort of mass surveillance state. Now, am I saying that in a way that I want to see that, or am I kind of making a prediction?
Yeah, I mean, I think that frankly, I think that the role of the World Economic Forum is somewhat overstated. I think that actually its main role is a sales job. That they are there to discuss certain policy, and to a certain degree, it has public coverage, and so it's a softening up exercise for the general public. So okay, they might view that they overstepped that mark somewhat with the Great Reset document and the response they got from that, but nonetheless, they have publicized the intention, the policy intention, and they got some pushback on it. But is that still there, or has that already mainly dissipated to a few motivated campaigners? I think that the vast majority of the population are once again back to sleep with respect to that whole policy area. And now we're into the world of AI, where 99% of people don't understand AI in any way, shape, or form. They're interfacing with it on a very superficial level to create silly little video clips and silly little graphics and so on. They have no real concept of what AI is already capable of. And the thing that I find most staggering about it is how quickly the capability is developing. We go back only 2 years, and it really was pretty poor. It's already vastly improved, and it's going to improve exponentially as we go on, and we're going to find that we are interfacing much more with AI at a point when it's already too late to stop it. So and the question is, and it brings us to another question, and that is whether we should even be attempting to stop these types of policies, or whether we should just be looking to divert them off course a little bit, because we end up in a different destination that way.
Something you said, I think it was in our last chat, which resonated with me, is the idea of gridlocking, trying to slow things down. You're not going to stop a lot of these things, but you can slow them down. You can create a lot of confusion within the system. Something Elon Musk said, for what it's worth, some time ago, he said, look, AI is here to stay. So instead of having open AI as the monopoly, let's create competition so that we can, in so doing, create some sort of accountability. That's also another strategy, isn't it?
No, I think it's a strategy that's going to fail. If AI is going to fail, it's going to fail because it has already turned into a financial bubble, and that bubble is on the basis of actually nothing. And the reason I say that isn't because it doesn't work, because for what it does at the moment, it does. It's increasingly becoming a workable thing. But where it doesn't work is financially, because they're piling billions and billions and billions of dollars into building data centers to solve a problem that actually most people don't want solved. So what exactly are they hoping to achieve with it at the end? I mean, I believe that their end goal is, and I think that the furlough schemes that we saw during COVID were a sort of trial run for this kind of a pilot scheme, is that human beings ultimately are simply going to be consumers. That we've headed that way largely already. So sitting in front of television screens watching AI generated product on Netflix is our ultimate destination as far as the people behind this idea are concerned, and everything that gets produced will be produced by AI. Actually, Ben Rubin and I were talking about this on the way in the car this morning with respect to music, because there's a YouTube channel run by a music producer called Rick Beato. He was talking about where he's asking the question of why heavy metal music does not exist anymore. Effectively, it's just more or less disappeared. There's no market for it. There's no interest in it, and one of the reasons he believes is because young people are not learning to play music. They're not learning musical instruments, so they're not producers. And because they're not producers, they're not interested in that type of music, which tends to require the ability to play an instrument of some kind. Kids have already become consumers. And then Ben was talking about the fact that this is great for the record companies because they love it. They don't have to anymore. They don't have to engage with human beings to produce the product. They just engage with the AI, and they're generating more and more AI generated music, which is being consumed. So humans become the consumers. The AI becomes the producer. But in the meantime, that's the destination that they want to see. But in the meantime, they're not getting that much buy-in, I don't think. And so the question is whether they can actually build this infrastructure without the entire economy and financial system going boom in the meantime.
Charles, you wrote a piece recently called Driving to Dystopia. How long is that road?
Well, yeah, it depends where you consider it. Funnily enough, just on the longevity of AI is interesting. Okay, again, quoted by the BBC, but I forget his name, Pichai, is it? The Google bloke, saying that first of all, he's exactly the word that Mike used, the bubble, the AI bubble. He absolutely considers that there's a bubble. And actually he's not talking just financially, but practically as well. And speaks relatively candidly, bearing in mind what he does. Sorry, when I say Google, I mean Alphabet. He posits that most organizations would be affected, and I think that probably is the case now. So that I don't think remarks like that should be ignored, and certainly should be set alongside whatever anything like Elon Musk might say. Going back to the World Economic Forum, and not necessarily directly related to this, but what I think is interesting about the World Economic Forum compared with Bilderberg and think tanks that we know less about. I mean, let's face it, the vast majority of people have never heard of Davos, the place, let alone the World Economic Forum or Klaus Schwab or any of the other stuff that we might be fairly conversant with. So that's the first thing to consider. But also in terms of the sort of layered approach, the World Economic Forum is cleverly done because, of course, it is public facing. It makes as much of a splash as it can, and therefore, if there are to be sort of awkward questions to be asked in Parliament about whether or not the World Economic Forum should have influence here, there, and whatever, that draws fire, and that's really critical to understand because it means that the World Economic Forum takes all the heat off so much of the other stuff that does go on because you're never going to get that discussed. Okay, obviously, Mike talking about ways in which it has been, but very, very infrequently. Whereas the World Economic Forum, because worldwide politicians are co-opted into having their names splashed all over the WF website and the Young Global Leader programs and all this stuff. So that's the sort of the public look over here bit, which works very well. Sorry, just an AI anecdote while I remember, because it is priceless. If anybody doesn't understand what algorithmic bias means, and this might help, some while ago, I'm not interested in it and I don't really understand how it works, but I understand that you can ask certain AI things to do stuff for you. So I found a whatever an AI website's called that says that it generates posters. So I asked it to create a poster to respond to a news item, and the headline for the news item was something like, this was with the Online Safety Act in mind, was something like UK column journalist imprisoned for misinformation, or something like that. And the poster it created was of a whole load of sort of gold streamers flying in the air in celebration, and hands raised holding glasses of champagne. I absolutely kid you not. I've got a screenshot of it. So I'm asked it to do that, and then I submitted exactly the same request, but I took out UK column and put in BBC, and it just flatly refused. It said, no, I'm not programmed to make stuff, about sort of unfortunate or criminal. I can't remember what excuse it used, but I mean, that was, to me, well, first of all, it's amazing there was a distinction between the organisations that you'd put into it, but the very fact that I hadn't referenced celebration, but it just took it that the imprisonment of UK column journalists should be celebrated was absolutely amazing. So I'm sorry, that's not directly related to all of this, but it is nonetheless fairly incredible, and I think should give people an insight into how this stuff works, because I really do not think people think about this. We've had Ben has talked, possibly Ben and somebody else in recent weeks, about the way in which AI is being adopted by, for example, the prison service and indeed probation and police. I mean, the inherent dangers of enmeshing all these systems with this are just so unbelievably gargantuan. It's just, it's scarcely credible. And on what? It's exactly like the COVID jab. Yeah, okay, we'd all heard of computers and the internet and this, that, and the other, but to immediately decide that you want to throw your lot in with what is in effect an unproven technology, in the same way that people had heard of vaccines and pharmaceutical products, but at the same time are absolutely content to queue up to take a product that had never ever been used before and was full of a whole load of stuff that they were unaware of, is amazing. But it goes back to this idea of marketing and its alliance with corruption, and how susceptible people continue to be to it. It is phenomenal. But to your point of whether grinding systems down ever has a permanent effect, I would say that it does. But again, like a lot of these things, why on earth would we ever hear about that? I mean, things absolutely do disappear and just sort of are never talked about again. So you don't really necessarily know that a victory has occurred. You have to sort of infer that. But I really do believe that that pushback in the form of either non-compliance by just not engaging with a particular scheme or policy or whatever it is you're supposed to do yields effects in the same way that interrogating that system and pushing it, and you can have all the AI you like, you've still got to have people to do stuff. I really do believe that does happen, and again, to bring up a sandbag, just in my own experience in relatively recent times, looking at the way in which policing matters, and because after all, this is in large part what things do come down to: people's concerns about not doing stuff because they say, oh well, there'll be a huge fine or you go to prison. Well, yes, okay, I'm absolutely not trying to suggest that those things can't happen. But having been on the other side of the fence and looking at the volume of what would be described as crimes that just go absolutely nowhere simply because there are not the resources to be able to progress it. And AI, again, it's absolutely not going to change that. So there is there is absolutely a case to be made for continuing to push and to continuing to oppose, and finding that systems or things that have been introduced do fail because of that.
Of course, they will tend to target certain types of people. So, but in the process, because the systems are so close to breaking point. I mean, if we think back 6 months or whatever it was to the immigrant hotel protesters that ended up going to prison, and in order to make space for those people, rapists and murderers had to be released. I'm not sure whether I'm entirely accurate in exactly who was being released in order to make space, but that was certainly the headlines at the time. So no matter what you think about the people that were arrested and put in prison, that the fact that they were put in prison absolutely made the mainstream headlines and therefore got massive public awareness around it. So it may be that some brave people are going to find themselves getting into a little bit of trouble, but that may have an unintended consequence that is beneficial to everybody.
Well, I mean, that is also one of the interesting side effects, that AI can be beneficial to a lot of people. It's not necessarily evil by design.
No, I think the issue here is not with AI in and of itself. There's two major dangers with it, in my opinion. One is that we use it in a way where we give up our own agency and our own abilities and our own skills. And to a certain degree, I've talked about this before, to a certain degree, we've already done this. The fact that we are now reliant on GPS navigation systems rather than using maps, we've given up a skill, right? And that is not easily a skill that's easily returned to us. So the day that there's a massive solar storm that takes out GPS satellites, we're going to find ourselves in trouble because we've allowed ourselves to lose a skill, which was a basic skill that we need. That's one part of it, and I think we've got to be very careful to if we're going to engage with AI and use AI, that we use it carefully, and we're not becoming lazy and deciding that we don't need certain skills anymore. So that's one point. Where I think it's really dangerous, it isn't about the AI in and of itself. It's about the application of AI and the assumptions that come with that. So for example, if we're making an assumption that the computer says no and the computer cannot be wrong, or if we're making an assumption that in order to deal with this massive backlog in criminal cases, we're going to replace the 12 human beings with an AI system instead, which is absolutely the direction to travel as far as the Ministry of Justice is concerned. That becomes really dangerous. Or if we're engaging with a bank and we have built ourselves a society where the requirement to have a bank account is absolutely built in and baked into the foundations of everything that we do, and suddenly we're kicking out the people that are working in the bank branches and we're relying on apps which are attached to AI systems. This is where it becomes dangerous because people become disenfranchised very, very quickly. And of course, once you're flagged in the system as being inappropriate for having a certain facility, then you never get that back because there's never a human being that you can speak to discover how you get that back or to negotiate with or whatever. And the system is non-negotiable with. That's the real danger, as far as I'm concerned, is actually the human beings deciding that the AI is right and that there's no requirement to have a human being involved in decision making anymore. And that applies whether it's our own decision making or whether it's the decision making of some institution or aspect of the state. That's where the danger is.
So I guess one way of pushing back then is if you want to get a new, I don't know, let's say new cell phone, and you're dealing with automations rather than with people, perhaps don't support that company.
Well, I would even go a step back from that, and I would say, why am I wanting a new cell phone? This is the point we've got to be at. Why are we? What are we actually? What is the society that we're actually wanting to build? And I said it a number of weeks ago. We need to embrace inconvenience. So use the old cell phone that isn't a smartphone, and refuse to. We've got to make some of these decisions about whether we're going to insist on, even something as I've talked about this before as well, even as something as simple as going to the supermarket and refusing to use their automated, increasingly AI attached checkout systems. Stand at the till until a human being turns up, even if that takes half an hour. And that's something I do. It's a very small, very small protest, but I absolutely refuse to use the automated checkouts. And every time I go into a bank branch, which isn't very often because, of course, it's very hard to do that these days because their opening times are so inconvenient for people. But we got to embrace inconvenience, don't we? And anytime a bank teller attempts to convince me that I should be doing this electronically, then I've got to push back on that. Or anytime I'm sitting on the telephone line to the bank or whomever it is, and they're saying, this would be much quicker if you just went on the website, and I'm standing there losing control of myself and swearing and blinding and, and all the rest of it, I'll just bloody mindedly sit on the phone and wait. And because that's how we, every time we do this, we're encouraging the other party to believe that they cannot get away with just switching this stuff off.
A protest of one is what you were saying, but Catherine Austin Fitz actually.
Yeah, sorry. No, it's all a protest of one.
Yeah, but I mean that's what Catherine Austin Fitz was saying. So if you have a lot of those, then you end up with protest of many.
Right.
Yeah.
That's it.
But the thing, though, Mike, is that you're making it sound as if all conveniences are bad. Must everything be inconvenient?
No. My point is that not that everything has to be inconvenient. Of course not. I'm not suggesting for 1 second that I switch off the electricity supply and switch off the heating in the house and switch off the dishwasher and the washing machine and all this kind of stuff. I'm saying that we've got to be very careful about, because I would argue that spending 4 hours washing my underpants is not the best use of my time, and so chucking it in a washing machine is probably something that's a good idea.
4 hours. You really aren't very good at it.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm glad you took it that way because it could have been taken another way. but anyway, the point is, it's. I think the decision point is coming when we decide whether we're giving up our own agency or not, and putting ourselves in a position because we should be always asking the question: what happens if that system doesn't work anymore? If the washing machine if a washing machine breaks, that's going to be pretty inconvenient. But at the end of the day, I can still wash my clothes by hand if I need to, right? Because that's not really a skill that any of us has lost. Doing it efficiently might be a skill that we've lost, but we can still do it. The point I was making about GPS navigation systems, well, that's where it starts to become a little bit more problematic because the maps, we may not have maps in our house anymore to get from A to B if we need to get from A to B, so whether we can relearn that skill or not is neither here nor there if we can't actually obtain the information in the first place. So as you move further and further up the chain, we are giving up more and more of our agency, and so that's what we've got to be careful of. I think the tipping point is any time that we see human decisions being replaced. That's for me. That's the first thing.
I think to split it, what it comes down to, I think in large part, is whether you're, and again, this did come up a couple of weeks ago, but whether you're active or passive in life, in what you're doing. I got pound notes out of a cash point or an ATM last night, and when I put my bank card that I'm still able to physically possess into the machine, the first remarkable thing was that it wasn't covered in sort of tape and paper saying it's out of order, and indeed that it didn't just spit my card straight back out. But I cleared that hurdle, and the first thing that came up on the screen, and I've meant to say this before, and it was at the back of my brain, I couldn't remember what it was, but the first thing that came up on the screen, even before it asked me to type in my highly secure PIN number or PIN, was it just said 7 out of 10 customers check their balance before withdrawing cash, or words to that effect. And I just thought, I do not care. I don't mind if everybody does it or if nobody does it. It has absolutely no bearing on my life. Thanks very much. But obviously what one is meant to take away from that is, oh, right, well, yeah, I suppose I'll check my balance. I mean, okay.
That's behavioral economics.
Yeah,
right there.
Exactly, it is. And it is fascinating. But the point of it is that it switches you from being active to being passive. And so although I was making an active decision to go to that machine to try to get cash out of it, which I have to say these days is absolutely never a given. It's horrid, plasticky banknotes, which again are that's a different story. And now actually is very relevant to the story, because there was, as far as I can see, there's absolutely no need to move away from the very durable notes that we did have to these dreadful ones now that last not very long if you don't sort of keep them in a locked box. But anyway, the point of it was that at the moment of being active and putting my card into the machine, the machine was immediately, and obviously it's not the machine, there was somebody telling the machine what to tell me, immediately trying to turn me into a passive consumer of whatever it is they want me to do. Oh, right, well, I'll go and check my balance. I might still be there. Who knows what the next suggestion might have been. But small and probably banal example, but for those people that do still use cash points, it's not the question of whether or not people are checking their balance. I mean, that's neither here nor there. It is, however, receiving a command, a directive, an insinuation, whatever it is, and responding to it and doing, in effect, what you're told. And this is exactly why the difference between paper maps and GPS, for example, is so terribly important. No, I'm not going to suggest that if you follow GPS, that means you cannot read a map, but it does mean that you are now taking your lead from a device that has no idea what you're doing in life, what you're wanting to do with your life. And this can be said to be the case across absolutely all the engagements that we have with these things. So there are many points to draw out of it, but I do think it is this issue between active and passive, and in a sense it's the same thing with washing Mike's undies, which luckily I've never had to do for him, but there may come a time. So
4 hours, Charles.
4 hours. I mean, I think I could probably whittle that down a bit. If I spend less time at the cash point checking my balance, then I can invest that time into really getting my hand washing skills up to scratch. But the point of it is that it's the sort of, well, what if? Exactly like we say, what if the system goes down? Actually, again, let's get into some real mundane anecdotes. One of our circuit breakers keeps tripping at home, and I think there's fault. But anyway, the point is, it has forced me to think about it and to go around the house, diagnosing all, what is it that's wrong. If I had a smart meter, if I had a this, that, and the other, I dare say all of that would have just been taken out of my hands. I wouldn't have even had the choice. The system would recognise a fault and probably just shut the thing off. Okay, that could be absolute misinformation. Maybe that wouldn't happen. But the point is, it would be out of my hands. It would be passive. And actually, while we're on it, that is a good example of pushback in the United Kingdom. There was meant to be a shutdown date for radio. Sorry, I forget the word, but old-fashioned electricity meters are supposed to have a radio timer on them, which switches between a daytime and a nighttime rate. Anyway, that was supposed to have ceased. Was it this year or was it last? It was this year. And okay, there wasn't much known about it because a lot of houses already had done away with these things. I speak sort of slightly personally on this because I do still have one of those old meters. The point is that when the deadline arrived, people just hadn't gone along with it. You got pretty much an email a day from the electricity company saying, "Yeah, come on, it's so secure, it's so convenient. We'll come and fix the smart meter for you." And people just didn't do it. And so what happened? The government on the day, on the deadline, they just wrote, actually, we're not going to switch it off. We're not going to switch that technology off. Right. Okay. Well, there we go. So that's I would say a good example of resistance to the system and it having an effect. Now, I've no idea what the plan is. I don't think any information has been put out about it subsequently. And this is what I mean. These victories sort of go without too much fanfare. They just say something very muted, and then it just gets left alone because, of course, to say anything more about it just draws attention to the fact that it failed. So it's an interesting
Gentlemen, due to my complications trying to set up earlier, I found a spot here where there's no plug point and my battery is very low. Would it be okay if we truncate this conversation so that it doesn't die? Because I have no power left on my laptop. So if it's okay with fitting. You, we'll call it a day. I'll catch up with you next week. But
doesn't it, just before we go, Jerm, does that not just summarize this conversation in one
absolutely does. I think that's priceless. We couldn't have rehearsed this any better. That is absolutely terrific. Well done.
But from this little farm outside Pretoria, I'll be back in Cape Town next week. Mike, Charles, I'll catch up with you then.